Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us today for our webinar. I hope everybody is staying well and doing well these days. Today, we'll be talking about modernizing your supply chain. We'll just go over a couple of housekeeping items before we dive in. We are recording the webinar. We have quite a bit to cover today, so we'll be sure to share a link to the recording and the slide deck later this afternoon. We'll try to keep it to about a 45-minute session. Leave some time at the end for questions. We'll wait towards the end, but don't hold back. Please submit your questions in the questions pane of the GoToWebinar control panel. I think that takes care of all the housekeeping. And with us today, I have three great presenters. We have Wally Marquez, Jim Hannon, and Kevin Simmons. And Wally, I think we're ready to get started.
Excellent. Thanks, Sasha. Appreciate that. Wally Marcus, I lead up cloud solutions here at Withum and looking forward to presenting today on digitizing your supply chain. Jim?
Hi, good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining us. My name is Jim Hannon. I'm the practice leader of the firm's manufacturing, distribution, and logistics service group. I'll call it a supply chain group since we handle all three basic aspects of getting goods from the factory to the end consumer. Sasha, one point of order so that the authorities don't come down on us. The first slide with the group sitting in a picture should have a mask on it. So if you could adjust that going forward, I certainly would appreciate it. I don't want any governor coming and accusing Withum of violating any safety distance protocols and such. But thank you for the opportunity to present to you today in the middle of the new normal. We are dealing with unprecedented turmoil within the supply chain, and that started, if you did any business with vendors in the Far East, when the tariff wars started. But I am old enough or seasoned enough, I'd like to think, to remember clients that were dipping their toes years ago into EDI, where computers from vendors and customers spoke to each other to create an efficient transaction and eliminate the paper trail that we all deal with. Well, we've come a trillion miles since then, and I certainly look forward to cascading the information from my colleagues on how to best go digital in this tumultuous world. Thanks, Sasha. Kevin?
Great. Good morning, everybody. So my name is Kevin Simmons. I'm an analyst on the management consulting team, assisting mainly with tech strategy. And so why don't we kick it off and start off with the agenda. So today, like Wally said, we're gonna walk you through the digital supply chain to help you understand how you rethink your business processes, and the goal being to achieve efficiencies and gaining a competitive advantage over your competitors. And we do this by reducing complexity through consolidation, all while updating your systems and tools. So today we're going to start with a summary of where supply chain management is currently at and where it's headed. And then we're going to walk you through Withum's customer journey approach and supply chain assessment. And this includes exploring your current state, future state, and then providing you with options to consider, digital roadmaps, or digital proofs of concepts. And throughout this webinar, we're going to get insights and analysis from both Jim and Wally. But to start, we're going to get the audience engaged a little bit with two poll questions. So Sasha, if you want to kick those off.
Sure, thank you. Just would appreciate everyone's participation just to get to know you a little bit better. We're curious to know, are you already making efforts to digitize your supply chain? Maybe you're already on it and just looking for some additional information. Maybe you're starting but making slow progress, still using disparate systems. Not yet, maybe 1 to 3 months. Not yet, but maybe in 3 to 6 months, or maybe in the next coming year. Thank you, everyone, for voting. It looks like we are split. Very interesting, right? Almost down the middle between people being on it and then they're not yet planning, and maybe in the next year. So I think that's the majority. I think everyone's in the right place here. So thank you for voting. And let's see. And secondly, this is a multifaceted question, but what are your key goals for your supply chain this year? Modernizing your systems and tools, reduce complexity and consolidate your technology footprint, streamline your key processes, optimize your technology investments, or maybe it's other. I know it's hard to pick just one. We kind of try to make it a little difficult, But let us know if it's other. Feel free to chat us, and I'd love to know what your goals are here. It looks like it's split across all of them. Mainly, looks like the reducing complexity is winning, and then optimizing technology investments. So should have some good info for you guys today. Thank you, and back to you guys.
Excellent, thanks, Sasha. That's helpful. As we go through and look at the supply chain as we all remember it, many of us have, will be a company, whether that's your own company or a company you work with, but it all starts in the middle of this traditional model called the SCORE model, or supply chain operations reference. This was brought in many years ago by Deloitte and really through the entire supply chain area, really driven home. And this was really the way of the future way back in the day, the beginnings of EDI, to Jim's point earlier. And this really was about a company driving its suppliers and its suppliers, and the interactions, both internal and external, as we brought supply, say, from overseas to onshore, and leveraging models near shore, et cetera, through that whole supply chain. And then it also carried forward and said, hey, great that we got this supply here. Now we got to get it out the door and drive a customer experience as we modernize and start to think further. What this model did was very linear, and it was not so interactive and integrated. So you had, folks that were really strong in one area, really good supply, but they really couldn't have the distribution piece and get it out the door properly. And there was all sorts of disconnects with this. And even companies that were driving this model, really organized and really trying to make things work, they were still struggling to maintain these models and keep them going. So what ended up happening is, this traditional model was very linear. And so as you went through and started to plan and develop, source, et cetera, all the things that you would expect a company in the supply chain to be working through, these models were really challenging for those particular companies. And as the evolution continued and folks started to work through how they were going to get to where they wanted to be, they started to modernize their supply chain and use digital and machine learning and AI to drive more resiliency in their supply chain, drive intelligent supply, synchronized planning. Back in the old model, in the SCORE model, what you had was a model that spoke to different areas of the supply chain, but really didn't allow you to see the whole area. So now what you're seeing in the modernization is, as you start to plan, there's an impact direct on the customer. There's an impact direct on the operations and driving it through. So as you try to bring the supply chain from the traditional model now to a more modern one, what you're seeing is companies take smaller bite-sized pieces of technology and automate those areas and make them simpler and easier to use, and bring in more machine learning. Hey, Kevin, why don't you talk a little bit about this linear framework and how it's sort of evolved to the interconnected framework?
Yeah, sure. Well, I think you hit on a lot of the main points. But basically, what it comes down to is the transformation from this linear process where there's siloed processes, and you kind of look at it from you have to do step 1 to step 2 to step 3, etc. But now the thought process is starting to become, how does each event, both internally and externally, affect not only just one part of my supply chain, but the entire supply chain network. And I think once you start to view it as a network and as interconnected, that's when you can start to implement some of these newer technologies and these newer processes. And a question back to you, Wally, or Jim, have you guys seen any examples of this movement in your experiences with your clients?
So for me, we're actively seeing this. We're currently working with numerous companies on bringing a product over from Germany, from Italy, in the spirits industry. And what this company is really challenged with is seasonality. And traditionally, seasonality was just simply a math problem, and it was solved through the algorithms that the larger ERPs would put in. And what they quickly found out is that the variability of the variance of the algorithm was very challenging. Now what we're seeing is companies actually look at that specifically and bring in machine learning, really look at the order and the customer buying behavior so that they can make more informed decisions on the supply. So I'm seeing a lot of that type work. Jim, I suspect you're seeing a lot of the back end, of ERP to the manufacturing plant and how their supply is sort of managing it. Any comment there?
Yeah, certainly, Wally. In the new normal with the plant and all the operating staff and production folks on the floor, if you will, all considered essential for the most part, depending on where you live. The back office is working more and more remotely. And there's a push certainly for a lot more collaboration and efficiencies out there in connection with processing of transactions, putting orders in. We do see a lot more reliance on this type of arrangement going digital because people need to leverage technology, especially if they want to work collaboratively. Folks that had dealt with crisis back in the recession in 2008, 2010, or lost a major customer for a number of reasons. Hopefully that's not the case with our audience here. They've established a playbook, and the supply chain model has established is a pillar of that plan, and it's important for companies to leverage how they manage their supply chain, vendor relationships. They have to look at it from a long-term perspective. A lot more collaboration, as I'm sure everybody's heard about in the marketplace. A lot more interaction because it's getting more and more difficult to forecast sales and the mix in sales without speaking to your customers. Thanks, Wally.
Yeah, excellent. Thanks. Those are good points. As we continue to work with our customers who are seeing the pressures come in on cost, on supply, even just thinking of little things at the cross dock now, all the extra work that happens at a cross dock if I'm bringing materials from overseas in and going through that process where you're seeing, it cleans when it comes off the ship, it cleans when it hits the dock, gets sanitized again on pickup, and then out the door it goes to you. All that delay, all that extra effort leads to delays, and it has to be factored into the overall lead time of your supply chain. So very interesting. Here at Withum, when we're doing our assessments, we use a technique called customer journey, and we this was borrowed from the marketing folks, and anybody who's in marketing on this call will certainly appreciate it. But customer journey from a marketing perspective is, building out a persona of a type of customer that comes through the e-commerce world, and I can track that type of customer, their buying behavior, etc. When we go through and look at digital transformation, we look at customer journey as a way to manage both the internal and external interactions. So for example, on the supply side, we might have a plenary session done by a planner, the shop foreman, etc. All these folks. And as we go through those relationships internally, a buyer, etc., we would go through all those folks and we look at the way they interact. And as we build out the processes and use cases for digital, what we're doing is helping them transform and think about those interactions as they go through it. It goes beyond the sign-offs. This is the subtle nuances that happen in a conversation, and it's very important that you understand both that internal and external behavior. And that journey, if you will, customer journey, would be a journey to our suppliers, and we'd want to talk to them. And the more inputs you have into this journey, the more likely you are to expose the inefficiencies and help mitigate risks as all of you look to drive digital in the future. We affectionately call it, current state, future state X, or current state, future state, roadmap, etc. So in this example here, what we do in the current state is we seek to understand. We spend a lot of time using the customer journey approach and gaining some insight into how an organization will go. If you do this yourself, this is a very important step and often overlooked. What we hear when I go in and talk to folks is, yeah, don't worry about where we are, we want to change. And part of understanding the change is there's people, process, and technology, which you'll hear me talk a lot about today, and then data. And if we don't truly understand the dynamic and the interrelationships of those elements, then we're going to have a hard time helping get you advice. And same as internally, as you get there and you start to think about the current state, don't just walk past it. Really take the time necessary to understand where you are today and where you want to be. And as I go through an assessment technique later on about maturity models, I'm really going to hammer this point home. And then, so as you seek to understand, one of the other big areas you're going to have here is the future state and gaining alignment. To me, the top title says it all here. This is all about alignment. If you can gain alignment internally with where you're trying to get to, so we've got a line in the sand with where we are today. We've got a desired endpoint. In between there is, going to be budget, is going to be what tools are we going to use, who's going to be responsible, accountability, etc. But it is so important. And what we see when we walk into firms at this point and companies at this point is that they are not necessarily aligned. And I have, generally I'll have a few people that are aligned, but we don't have a budget, or we have plenty of budget, but we don't have anybody to lead the charge. Very important to get all the ducks in a row and spend enough time here through the process. When I get to the assessment parts, when we share actual slides from our assessment coming up here, as I get there, I'll explain how we do a lot of these activities. In here, what this is really the ways to the how. And to me, what this is, we'll do current state, future state, options to consider, current state, future state, digital roadmap, and current state, proof of concept, etc. And so what you're really doing here is you're coming up with how you're going to get there, and depends on your maturity. A lot of companies we walk into they have no idea where they want to go. They just know they want to get there, and they've been trying for a while and they're trying to decide. So we might end up with a full roadmap. Some people have something very specific. They want to solve for their demand challenge, or they want to solve for supplier challenges, whatever that might be. So in that case, we might give a specific vision-centric option or a few options. If you're doing it like that, here's a good, better, best type approach where we can look at this. The key here for us, and you'll hear me say this a few times, is you don't have to boil the ocean when you start on your digital journey. Sometimes it is a very small use case that you're trying to solve for, and it is you're dipping your toe in the water as you start to get more digital. And we'll come back to a little bit of this here in a second. So on this particular slide, we use this as a way to communicate with our customers. And this slide really is about people, process, technology, and data. This slide is about the customer journey that I alluded to, and it is about bringing together the current state, future state, and your options. This is your business cases. This is everything you need around here. And so as we go through here and we look at, say, digital maturity and maturity model analysis, what that really is, if we come in and we have a company that says we want to be entirely digital by X date, and then we go in the back and they're still, they're running their all their plans in the back and in the manufacturing plant. They're running all their tasks on paper, and nothing is digitized today. They haven't done any time and motion studies or any of the other things that we would typically see with a more advanced plant. Then we know where they're kind of at in the maturity model, and we'll maybe challenge them more. So I'm going to we've actually pulled in a maturity model that I'm going to walk through here a little bit for a specific use case, and we'll use that as a use case here shortly. Readiness is another one, and I think that's key. How ready are you? And readiness is, again, people, process, and technology, but it's also budget, executive buy-in, where are you at in the marketplace? How is COVID impacting you? All of those things and questions are going to come at you in multiple ways as you go through this. we're in technology, so if we didn't have a gap analysis and alignment, you'd probably question why do we not have that up here? But the reality is the gap analysis and alignment really comes out. So if you had a specific area and then you wanted to look at where you are today, current state, and then you wanted to look at a future state where you want to be and gain that alignment, that gap analysis in good old tech speak is just that. That's your alignment. That's where you got to get to solve for that gap. We love opportunities for improvement. We think that's a very good way to get an assessment. We think even internally you have an ongoing concept. And digital companies and innovative companies that we work with are companies that are continuously investing in innovation and moving forward. And so improvement opportunities for us is more around the innovation side and driving that home. This is no different than you think of, say, FedEx many years ago, which was a leader in the industry. They brought in the no left turn, and this is artificial intelligence in its very, very early days. And when they were doing their route and route management, and in that route management, they came up with ways to be more efficient, get the products to customers quicker, and not just look at a map and say, this is the map and we're going to take it. What they did was they built their routes with no left turns, and that became an industry standard. Now you can copy that code off the internet and it's no big deal. But in the day, this was beyond and was very innovative, and they were leaders because they started doing this earlier. In my former life, I worked with, we did a significant project with the green tractor folks at John Deere. And this was very interesting because we walked in and it was I was with a sizable firm, and we were two big sizable firms, and we were walking in to determine, how we could help them with their data. And it turns out John Deere is not actually, the John Deere that we know and love. John Deere is actually a very digital company, a very data-driven company, and they proceeded to tell us what we should be telling them about digital. And it's just a good sign of a company that started digitizing way earlier. Things like, what is the yield from a particular field, and how much fertilizer do I need? And then based on the amount of fertilizer that came off that tractor, they're automatically generating purchase orders, for example, for those farmers to get more feed and seed and fertilizer. Very, very complex and advanced through the use of Industry 4.0 and technologies of that nature. Obviously, when you look at maturity, they were visionary and far beyond.
And Wally, we see obviously the road to digital transformation. There's got to be solid controls in there. A lot of large public companies and private companies pride themselves on tight controls, making sure that transactions are in line with their specific instructions. One thing that we've also seen too is the procurement wing of a company has become almost a profit center because they're controlling costs, they're managing terms, they're managing payment terms, looking for discounts, rebates, discounts on the front end, rebates on the back end of transactions. And we've also seen, surprisingly, or not so surprisingly, that when a company goes through a purchase order with a customer and starts invoicing them, the digital platform that they're on, whether it's a rebate or other platforms, monitors the historical invoices, the cumulative invoices against that PO, and woe to those that overbill those particular companies, because you're going to get a dunning notice from procurement that you overbilled in connection with what procurement has into the system through an approved purchase order. So an interesting dynamic. Used to fall on accounts payable to do that. Now we see procurement taking more and more of an active role on that.
Wow, that's interesting. Yeah, that's putting three-way match on steroids right there. I love it. That's a great.
Yeah, remember, Wally, we're trying to go paperless here too. So
that's great. That's right. I do like that. That's awesome. Okay. So, these are, as we go through and think about our assessments, these are really the key areas that we try to drive and go for. I kind of walked through a few of them in the roadmap, and we're going to try and go through a few different examples here of how we do it in the marketplace. And really, you know, the biggest thing that we see is how are you going to do this? And this is a long, you know, this is probably the path you're going to take when you first start. It really is a convoluted path until you start to build up your sophistication and your own maturity level. Sometimes this is what it's going to be like. So we encourage smaller pieces of the pie to help get you along that way. This would be right out of our deliverables and what we do in the supply chain. And as we start to think about an assessment, this three-step approach, which I've already shared with you, this is going to be an options to consider type approach. But what this really does is gives you an example of how we might use our assessment. So in the current state, it's really about analysis, maturity models, readiness. I'm trying to understand these areas, and we're going to walk through a few of these things. The analysis is interesting, but I'm going to spend a little bit of time on maturity model and a little bit of time on the readiness assessment and making sure that we're aligned here. Analysis is tough because it is the secret sauce, if you will, and it's not that I can't share it here. It's just that it is every customer is unique, truly, on how you're going to go through and gather that data and information necessary. In the future state, it's about aligning. I think I've made that point, but you know, the gap analysis is key, understanding from point A to point B. We like our maturity model to identify gaps because we think the gaps, and you'll see how we bring the objective and the desired outcome into that maturity model so that we can identify gaps in your technology and people and process. And then the options to consider really is about what is a proof of concept. So just, I thought it would be helpful here. Some of the proof of concept things that we're working on today are less than $5,000. So this doesn't necessarily mean that you have to spend, you know, tens and tens of thousands of dollars to get to where you need to be. What it means is you got to at least try to dip your toe in the water. Fail early, fail often, fail cheap, all those nice little phrases we want to try and work on as we try to improve and get you to where you want to be. So this is literally our assessment. So I'm going to spend some time here talking a little bit about this maturity model.
Wally, real quick, I just think that it's important to note how, you know, a lot of the examples and everything that we've talked about, you know, it may seem like you have to go through and it's one swoop and, you know, your whole supply chain is digitized, but I think it's important to note that you can, you know, it doesn't have to be all at once. You can break it down and you can, you know, start small and then work your way to becoming more of a digital company. And I think that that's really important to focus on for, you know, some of the listeners that, you know, may think that they might not have the budget right now or anything like that. I think, you know, we can show you how, you know, you can start, like I said, start small and then eventually work your way up to becoming, you know, that fully digital company.
Yeah, good point. Very good point. Don't boil the ocean. As we start to think through a maturity model, and this is a busy slide, and we'll make it pretty simple here in a hurry. We would usually have this all filled in, but essentially what you have is down the left of the slide is you have some of the areas that you want to think about digitizing. And then in the middle, we would have what a marginal company looks like, what a competitive company looks like, and what an innovative company looks like. And as we go through and build out our assessment, we're looking at where you are today to where you want to be. So if we just think of that slightly differently, what we're looking at is, you know, responsive demand supply matching. So we're looking at, you know, marginal company would be more manual entry. Competitive would have a single source of truth where you're sharing information across the entire organization. And an innovative company would be fully digital optimized solution, which really means they probably have machine learning, robots, RPA or robotic process automation, and they're really trying to drive home the mundane tasks and just have all those things automated. And then you're repurposing people, and to do what Jim said before about taking a cost center and making it into a profit center, you're repurposing people to help drive revenues, change customer behavior and the customer experience, which is really interesting. So as we continue down this maturity model, what ends up happening is you have a current state, future state, and then you have this where you are today in red, and then in the gray you have this where you want to be. And then as we think through that for a second, that then becomes your delta to the desired a maturity level. Or said another way, this is the gap analysis. This is the investment that's going to be required, not just in dollars, but in people and process. This is the investment required to help drive this maturity and get you to a level that you want to be. I think we all know, we've all been probably around business, but the last mile is probably the toughest mile to get to. So we're constantly setting expectations with our customers around this maturity. So this assessment happens, and then as you go through and do a new use case, then you redo the assessment. So it's this constant evolution of looking at where you're at from a technology standpoint, from a people standpoint, from a process standpoint, and thinking about, are you getting the data insights you need to help drive where you want to be? And we think this model is a really interesting model and a really good approach. Hey, Kevin, do you have anything you want to add here before I move on?
No, I think you hit on it really well. Basically, yeah, we can come in and look at these different areas that we recognize as important in the digital supply model, and then with our experience and research, we can get you from that red dot to that gray dot, basically through a ton of different gap analysis research and things like that. So I think you did a great job hitting on all those.
Yeah, I just want to make one.
Wally,
yeah, go ahead, Jim.
Wally, just a thought too. The just-in-time inventory concept has always been a hot topic and best practice, and certainly helped companies' working capital and maximize that. But with the new normal and the uncertainties in supply, I'm not sure that's going to be necessarily the case in certain industries. I think a digital format gives you the sense of, are we stockpiling? Are we over ordering? That may be a management decision so that they don't get caught short on orders, because that's really what everybody's trying to avoid here. So the digital platform allows you to do that, because you can certainly see where your inventory levels are, through a dashboard, and making sure with the disruptions, whether they be trade, pandemic, or natural disaster driven, certainly are some things that management's paying a lot of attention to lately.
Yeah, I love that. The strategic advantage of the supply chain. As you see, companies will seek to leverage their supply chain relationship now, because they can get product in. I don't think we've hit our full impact on the lack of product in shorts, if you will, in the marketplace yet. And I think as we evolve into October, November, and into the new year, I think you're going to see more of an impact, and perhaps a consolidation of some of the marketplaces, as companies are struggling to get what was once a decent relationship with their suppliers has now been maybe evolved and taken over by someone who's a little more advanced, or has the cash necessary to drive that supply chain and bring that product in and sit on that balance sheet number for a little bit. Good point, Jim. Love it.
And try getting a bicycle lately, Wally. It's a little difficult, but yeah, we'll. That's what we're striving towards: mutual dependency.
Yeah, love it. The next area, so that's our maturity model, and how we go about doing it. Obviously, there's some math involved, and what we do is really look at, there is definitely a number, and we rate and rank, and we use magic quadrants, which I'll get into in a second here, to identify where you're at. This year is really about digital readiness, and I spent a little bit of time talking with you about this. And we use this in here because, like I said, we think the digital benefits of generating value and innovation, and all collaboration and accountability. Collaboration, to what Jim just talked about as well. It's not necessarily just about your safety stock that you have here and what my lead times are. It's also about how well I interact with my supplier, and if I'm truly the number one customer for my supplier. And so all those interactions through a customer journey start to come out. And with digital, that fully interconnected supply chain, I now start having not just access to my inventory, but I have access to my supplier's inventory and what I can get and can't get. And if I can do that, then I can drive some information for for our customers, because now I can start getting into available to promise and all those different things that secure the customer relationship and ensure that we are customer centric as an organization. So in here, we spend a lot of time talking about digital benefits, and you can't walk away from benefits without having some risks. You know, we want to make sure, you know, some of the biggest hacks, you remember when 3D printers first came out, great technology, what was happening? The cyber folks were, it was a nightmare because those that direct access to the web was causing all sorts of grief, and people were coming in through that. They've since solved for a good portion of that, but that's just an example. There's other examples as we continue to evolve down these digital areas that may not be as secure or as revolutionary, and people try to take advantage of it. We cannot fall away from the evolving customer expectations and sophistication. I don't know what you folks are like, but I'll be in Lowe's and on my Amazon and thinking, where am I going to get this for the cheapest? And I'm looking at what I want, I scan it, and I'm on the web. So we as a consumer in general are way more sophisticated than we ever were, and the innovations of technology are allowing, you know, even more and more, as you're seeing apps where I can literally scan the Lowe's app, it crawls the web and tells me where to get it at the cheapest price possible, which is, you know, ridiculous, but it is what it is, and it's sophistication that people are doing. When we go in, we want to talk about, you know, some of the ways that you are looking at your digital supply chain and your offerings. And those offerings are really around demand management, sourcing strategies. We look at the supply chain through the whole thing as a value chain. So that brings you back to that score model, if you will. And that score model was really from all the way from your supplier all the way to our outbound logistics, and making sure that our customers receive and enjoy their product. This will include, you know, post and support and all of those things in the customer service area, which then allows us to stay engaged with our customers and stay connected. I put a few questions here. We have lists and lists of questions, but you know, if you're internal and you're trying to get to a digital readiness internally, I think what you can do is start asking yourselves these questions. Really bring in risk. Really concentrate on cybersecurity. It's not going to go away anytime soon. This is not a Withum plug for our cyber team. This is more, if we never talk again, make sure that you take this very seriously. This is a risk in the future. Regardless of whether you're going digital. Start with a strategy and make sure you understand the benefits. When we go in, a lot of people want to get to where they want to get to, but they forget about that we got here for a reason. We had an objective to try and hit, and then we get lost in the detail. We started building a demand generation or demand planning tool through automation, and then it gets you know, fails. And then we have a little mini victory and we forget about it. And then before you know it, we've gone away from our initial objective. Make sure that as you go through these processes, you stay on point. And it's one of the biggest things, right? We, as a techie, I get lost on some Saturday afternoons where I start something and I'm started one way and I think I want to learn about this or I want to do something, and I end up in a completely different area. That same thing in business is not necessarily the right way to go. So make sure you stay on point or near point, and that you do allow that opportunity to learn and discover, but that you have constant feedback loops so that you're tying in your budget to where you're trying to get to, and that you understand when you're failing and when you're hitting the good positive side. This next slide is really about a little more detail around the questions to ask, a little more detail around, you know, how you might look and assess. So what we really wanted to do here, this will be a reference slide for you, but it's really about you go about doing it. What should you do? Is your organization ready? And so when we do a lot of these readiness assessments, some of these readiness assessments for us are just done in the initial sales scoping calls, because we can learn a lot just by asking these questions where you're at. Same as if we were coming in to, say, do an audit and we ask for a bunch of documents and a month later we still don't have the documents. That's pretty telling. Jim can speak way better to me to that than I can, but it is pretty telling. It's the same here. We ask a bunch of questions about where you're at, what you're thinking, and sometimes somebody's done a lot of searching online or some things and they have some ideas, but they really haven't sort of pulled them together. Make sure you pull these together and align on where you're going. It's very important. Otherwise, you could spend a lot of money, a lot of time, a lot of resources, and not truly get to where you want to get to. Jim, you want to comment there? I mean, I'm gonna put you on the spot a little bit on the audit side and on that side, but can you just comment on that? I want to bridge that from digital to that sort of traditional model that we see. What do you see when you some of the lacks in data or information that our customers are having when you go in and ask them?
Yeah, it runs a gauntlet. One that immediately comes to mind is a lack of discussion and communication between different business units where they're not fully integrated. They don't have shared access to databases, and that's not just remote subsidiaries or divisions. Could be somebody around the corner or across the building from you. So communication, obviously, what we've seen work is where everybody has full transparency into transactions. We're seeing more and more approvals of transactions in a digital platform. And again, I get back to my earlier comment, you don't want to abandon controls, and you don't necessarily have to abandon controls on a digital platform. It's just different. There are some checks, balances, and final reviews. But Wally, to your point on the cybersecurity aspect of things, we see a lot of phishing. We see a lot of bad actors out there that are trying to get money out of a company. So that certainly has heightened everybody's radar on what they're looking at as well. So don't diminish those implications.
Love it. Thanks, Jim. So I've gone through the digital readiness, and I've gone through a little bit. We didn't really spend much time on the assessment itself, but the assessment really is about people, process, technology, and data. And out of the assessment comes a lot of initiatives and things that you want to do. And that gap of you're here today and you want to be there tomorrow. And for those of you that are familiar with Stephen Covey's work, or this is actually an Eisenhower matrix, that Eisenhower himself used in planning. So it's actually really cool if you read about the magic quadrants and the grids and where the evolution of that has been. But Stephen Covey certainly made it famous. And so what we do is sort of look at people, process, technology, and data, and we go through our interviews with a lot of different people. And we do that both individual, we do cross-functional workshops to make sure that we're driving home. Remember, the customer journey is all about the interactions and the interactions between internal and external customers. And so we want to make sure we solve for a lot of these things. And what's interesting as we go through and look at, this is actually an actual one, as we go through and look at it, you can see when we were with this group, they said, hey, everything is extremely urgent and extremely important. And so this was done with a single group, and they were trying to tell us that they are by far, all these things are the most important. If we don't get them done, we will be out of business tomorrow. Then when we brought everybody together, it was amazing how the debate, so what we do is we send a few people up at the front, and so what you have the ability to do is you can grab one of these stickers, and all of these would be stickers, sticky notes. And you can either grab a new one and put it where you think it is and give your reasoning for it, or you pick up somebody else's and you move it based on where you think it should be. Now, it starts off pretty fun, but I'll guarantee you this exercise is really telling. You, first of all, can see the drivers of an organization. You can see who's leading the charge in whatever group. You can see which group is strongest. And what you're trying to do is eliminate bias in here. And so as we go through and facilitate these, we're driving discussion up at the board. This is done standing. This is done everybody there together. And we might be 15 to 20 people around, and we're debating and having a good, wholesome discussion. And we ask, the typical thing, hey, let's be respectful, let's be mindful, and let's not make it about your own personal agendas. Let's really look at everything. And we call this a prioritization workshop, et cetera. We've adopted Stephen Covey's work, and we feel it's a really good way to drive discourse amongst and reduce the silos in your organization. This is a very simple roadmap. It's a screen. Obviously, there's a lot more detail that go into our roadmaps, but essentially we like this slide because as we go through a modernization or a digital program and we start putting together roadmaps and programs, you can see what we'll do here is we're talking about when these things happen. So we'll take these, so predictive demand or connected customer or any of these different areas where we're seeing our customers go digital. And then we go back, if you will, to that prioritized workshop here. And now we have a reduced number of elements to put in here. And we then determine what comes first, what comes second. And this here technique, so this prioritized workshop, as we work with management teams to adopt this, to reduce the bias in their decision making, we find that we then ultimately end up with what comes first, what comes second. And the most important line here is across the bottom, and that is an ongoing innovation and digital use case. If you are going to be on the cutting edge and you're, when we sit with you in the maturity model and you're talking about innovation and you're talking about we want to be here, yet you're still living in paper, then what's happening is there's a disconnect between the actions that the company is pushing forth and where you are. And so we'll spend a lot of time aligning management teams and structures. I do executive coaching a fair amount, and I'll spend a lot of time in this piece. We all seem to be able to plan, but getting from plan to execution sometimes is a delta. And so I'll spend a lot of time on getting stuff done. And that really is what this is. I'm going to hand it over to Jim as we start to think about the impact of COVID. And I really want to hear, Jim's vast experience. He's got a lot of customers here. So Jim, over to you on this slide. Jim?
Sorry, Wally. I was on mute with the dog making a fuss in the background here. So
my apologies.
No, from a high level perspective, we've seen a number of clients invest in technology. It's a lot easier to manage your business both pre-pandemic and during the pandemic with respect to managing the plant operations, the suppliers, across the board. We've also seen people take a hard look at and challenge their current suppliers to make sure that their product and their needs are the risk inherent in there if you went with a sole supplier is diminished. So everybody's challenging under the new normal, and to do that there has to be a platform in which to go through that. I think I speak for everybody on the phone that if you're not doing daily cash flow projections, you're doing weekly, monthly, 13 weeks, 3 months, whatever the case is, you really need to get a handle on not only what your current payables are, but what your expected commitments and purchase orders are outstanding so that you can manage the cash flow. And if you see any gaps in there, then the receivable side of the house and the credit side of your business really needs to step in and manage that. And we're seeing that companies that have gone through this have a established game plan and a strategy to get through these tough times have really flourished, believe it or not, as demand for their products is uncertain in the future. And to manage the backlog and to forecast sales is something that you talked about, I think, Wally, in your earlier slide on their predictive demand and being connected to the customer. That's all this is, and it's going to make management, and not to say it's a magic bullet and an elixir for all the operational problems that our clients deal with, but having good database dashboards to manage the business are clearly something that's helpful and long-term beneficial.
Yeah, love it. Thanks, Jim. Thanks so much. As we come to the last 3-4 slides here in the last part of the deck, we wanted to leave you with a well-documented use case. So if you're out looking online and you're trying to search, this use case is out there. And this is a digital connected model and, sort of the new score, if you will. And I'm going to turn this over to Kevin to walk us through the next few slides quickly. But again, this will be given to you in the deck when we follow up.
Yeah. So real quick, 3M obviously being a company that we're all familiar with, they use this pandemic and COVID-19 and everything that's been going on as a way to kind of put their digital supply chain into action. And the three main ways that they were able to do it is through, as you can see on the graphic around their logo, they had connected customer through a more advanced omni-channel. They were able to use intelligent supply with these virtual control towers that were in all of their different locations across the world, so that when something would happen, they would have all this information simultaneously, as opposed to one area getting the information first and then having to wait and then make a decision later. And they were also able to look up and downstream for more of a synchronized planning from their suppliers to their customers. And as a result of this, they were able to really be successful throughout the pandemic with the creation of a ton more different masks. And so this is kind of just an example of how you can be proactive and use something that generally would really hurt a ton of different businesses, but how you can use a digital model to kind of get ahead of the curve and get ahead of any challenges that you're going to be facing as a result of it. So if you can go to the next slide. Basically, they saw the need to align their capacity with demand, and they created these new efficiencies to be able to get ahead of this curve. And they were able to do this through ERP systems, integrated business planning, and shared demand planning, all of which allowed them to see the whole supply chain at once, as opposed to just, like I said, these siloed processes. And 3M and other companies were able to see the benefits of being able to communicate across their entire supply chain, especially these big global companies. And they were able to understand that this is how you get ahead of an event that no one could plan for. So that's one case that really shows the success of being able to stay ahead, even when it's impossible to plan for something like this.
Excellent. Thanks, Kevin. And just as we think about closing out our webinar and getting to a few questions, we wanted to leave you with some guiding principles as you embark on your journey. Withum certainly is happy to sort of get engaged and work with you, but you can do this on your own, and you can certainly start and drive some of these things on your own. The biggest thing is to get out of your own way, and we find a lot of people are not giving up the past. They need to recognize it. They need to understand where they come from, but they need to give it up and get out of their own way. We often hear, this is the way we've always done it, and things like that to get in the way. The other thing is, remember, customers are driving this. This is all about customer centricity and changing the sophistication of our customers and meeting the needs of our customers. And so I think this is a big part of digital, is we're trying to make the customer experience better. Be sure you have a vision. Many folks, as I said earlier, don't have a vision, and they're blindly walking in a direction like I do on Saturday afternoons with my technology. So make sure that you are driven towards going in a certain place. There are people involved here. Knock down the silos, think big, and use metrics along the way. And I want to thank you. First of all, I want to thank my co-presenters today very much. It was great, Jim. It was always good to connect with someone with your experience and background. And Kevin, thanks very much for helping with all of this work today. Much appreciated. Do either of you have any closing thoughts before I hand it over to Sasha to close this out?
Wally, just everybody on the supply chain certainly wants to remain lean, and the tenets there are specifying and identifying value. Importantly, by product, making sure your supply is uninterrupted, and at the end of the day, pursuing perfection. So pretty lofty goals, Wally. Any magic answers to that? The digital platform certainly will help you towards that end means.
Yeah, excellent. Good point. Good point. So with that, let's hand it over to Sasha, and he can talk a little bit about closing this out.
Or if there's any questions.
Oh, yeah, or any questions, yeah.
All right. Thank you, Wally. Thanks, everybody. We don't have too many questions. We will be sending out a copy of the slides. Somebody did ask that. We recorded the session as well, so we'll send a link to both the recording and the slide deck this afternoon. So keep an eye out for an email from Withum. And just on last closing thought, we are excited to announce a podcast launch coming at the beginning of November. So just have a little bit more work to do with it, but we're basically launching a technology agnostic podcast where we will talk about modernizing systems, share best practices, customer stories, and provide real world examples from everything surrounding ERP and CRM selection, implementation, lessons from the trenches. We're going to have some guest speakers, so we're really excited about that. If you'd like to know when we launch and be made aware of new episodes, definitely subscribe to us. Right now, the link's not clickable, but once we send out the deck, you'll be able to subscribe to us and keep an eye out for the podcast launch. And if anybody has any questions after the webinar, please feel free to reach out to either Wally or Kevin or Jim. We'll provide their contact information at the closing slide there. And that's pretty much it. Thank you everyone for joining and providing all the great content, and we hope to see you again soon.
Excellent.
Stay safe, everybody.
Stay safe. Thank you.